In terms of protecting the votes, Senator Kingibe is there as Senator. Obika Joshua is there. So our vote does count. We came out in 2023. I led protests here for 23 days. I was in DSS. I was over all kinds of things. I was angry. I walked out of that place. Of course, our vote does count. The minister, this is not Obiako. You can't write votes in AMAC. He cannot. Somebody should tell the minister that Dr. Mo says that the will of the people will count. On Saturday, there's going to be a new AMAC where boldness, objectivity, decisiveness, and fearlessness will take center stage. Enough of people dying, enough of poverty, enough of brigandage. We own this city. Wike does not own the city. The city belongs to the people, the suffering masses, the young people listening to me. We own this city.
Something unusual happened in Abuja. Not quietly, not subtly, and definitely not in a way the ruling party expected. From the early hours of Saturday morning, as results from polling units across the Federal Capital Territory began to trickle in, it became obvious that this was not going to be one of those routine local government elections Nigerians have learned to ignore. This was not business as usual. This was not the familiar script where the party in power cruises effortlessly, announces predictable figures, and moves on while the public shrugs and goes back to daily survival. This time, the numbers were telling a different story, and the story was loud. In ward after ward across Abuja Municipal Area Council, the African Democratic Congress, ADC, was not just competing with the All Progressives Congress, APC. It was beating them. Convincingly, repeatedly, publicly. At polling units in places like Mambaro, the results were stark. ADC polling 29 votes while APC managed only 4. At Mambaro City Gate, ADC recorded 32 votes against APC's 10. In parts of Kabwa, Gwarimpa, ADC surged ahead with 60 votes to APC's 40. These were not isolated incidents. They were patterns. Patterns that made it increasingly difficult to dismiss what was happening as coincidence or error. Across Gwarimpa, one of Abuja's most populous and politically significant wards, result sheets showed ADC maintaining a clear lead. Even in areas where APC eventually edged ahead, the margins were nothing like what the ruling party has grown accustomed to in elections conducted under its watch. In several trade clusters and residential zones, ADC cleared APC with margins that would have been unthinkable just a few election cycles ago. And here is the key point. These numbers were not rumors. They were written on official result sheets. They were signed. They were stamped. They were photographed. They were uploaded. Or at least, they were supposed to be. Because as Nigerians rushed to confirm these shocking figures on the Independent National Electoral Commission result viewing portal, IReV, they ran into a wall. A digital wall. A blackout. The portal was live. The portal was accessible. But the results were not visible. According to reports coming in from polling unit agents, party officials, and election observers, results were successfully uploaded from several polling units across the Federal Capital Territory. Yet, when members of the public tried to view them, the pages remained blank. The system was on, but the window was dark. In plain terms, the results were going in, but Nigerians could not see them. And that is when alarm bells started ringing. Because Nigerians have seen this movie before. They remember 2023. They remember the promises made about transparency, technology, and real-time accountability. They remember how those promises collapsed into silence when the system stopped working exactly at the moment it mattered most. That experience left scars, deep ones. Trust once broken is not easily restored, and for many Nigerians, the wounds from that election never fully healed. So when the IReV portal began malfunctioning again, this time during an election that was producing unexpectedly unfavorable results for the ruling party, the reaction was swift and visceral. Suspicion filled the vacuum left by official silence. As of the time of recording this video, INEC had issued no comprehensive statement explaining the glitch. No technical breakdown. No timeline for resolution. No reassurance. And in an election environment already charged with tension, silence is not neutral. Silence fuels speculation. Silence creates fear. Silence damages credibility. It was in this atmosphere of uncertainty that the Obedient Movement, one of Nigeria's most organized civic and political advocacy coalitions, raised a formal alarm. According to information from its headquarters, the group confirmed that the IReV portal was active but not displaying results that had already been uploaded from multiple polling units across the FCT. Their message was clear: something was wrong. And rather than retreat into online outrage alone, the group issued a call to action. Supporters and concerned Nigerians were urged to peacefully proceed to collation centers in Area 10 in Garki, carrying physical copies of polling unit results for cross-referencing. The instruction was not violent. It was not reckless. It was civic. Be present. Be vigilant. Be peaceful. Do not allow the process to move forward without scrutiny. That call resonated far beyond the Obedient Movement itself. Ordinary Nigerians, many of whom had never cared about a council election in their lives, suddenly found themselves refreshing the IReV portal, comparing result sheets, arguing in comment sections, and sharing updates from their wards. Something had changed. And to understand why this election felt different, why it triggered such intense national attention, you have to look beyond the numbers and examine the context. This election did not start on Saturday morning. It started days earlier. For the first time in Abuja's history, residents woke up on election day to a government-imposed movement restriction. The directive came from the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, citing security concerns. On paper, it sounded administrative. In practice, it felt like a lockdown. Roads were blocked. Movement was restricted. Transport was disrupted. Confusion spread. Ask yourself a simple question. Who does a movement restriction on election day really affect? It does not affect powerful politicians. It does not affect ministers or their aides. It does not affect party leaders or their security details. Those people move freely, regardless of any directive. The people who are affected are ordinary citizens, voters who rely on public transport, voters who must walk long distances, voters who become confused, intimidated, delayed, or discouraged enough to stay home. The timing was too convenient to ignore. The FCT minister, a known APC loyalist with deep political stakes in Abuja, issued a directive that had the practical effect of suppressing turnout in a city where opposition support has been visibly growing. Whether or not that was the stated intention, it was the predictable outcome. And seasoned political actors do not issue directives without understanding their consequences. Dr. Moses Paul, the ADC chairmanship candidate for Tulip C, described the situation bluntly. He said the restriction created confusion that directly contributed to the low voter turnout recorded across several wards. A man who has lived in the area for decades, he described the atmosphere on Saturday morning as resembling a state of emergency, a heavy phrase in a country that knows exactly what emergency rule feels like. Yet despite all of this, something remarkable happened. People still came out. Not in the numbers a free and unencumbered election would have produced, but enough. Enough to send a message. Enough to vote against the APC in numbers that are now appearing on result sheets across Abuja. Those who walked through the confusion. Those who refused to be intimidated. Those who waited patiently at polling units despite the uncertainty. They voted. And they voted against the establishment. That, more than anything else, explains the tension surrounding this election. The APC controls everything at the federal level. The president of Nigeria is Bola Ahmed Tinubu. The party controls the National Assembly. The FCT is administered by an APC minister with sweeping powers over security and infrastructure. In a truly free and fair contest, a party with that level of institutional dominance should not need fear tactics. It should not need movement restrictions. It should not need intimidation. Yet reports emerging from multiple wards paint a disturbing picture. ADC agents in parts of Kabusa, Takamshera, and surrounding areas reportedly received explicit threats, warnings that they would be beaten or killed if they did not abandon their roles. These are not vague accusations. These are specific locations, specific threats, specific acts of intimidation. Let that sink in. In the Federal Capital Territory of Nigeria, the seat of government, the symbol of national authority, citizens were allegedly threatened with death for performing a lawful civic duty during an election. And then there is the presence that loomed largest over the entire process. The Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Nyesom Wike, was visibly inspecting polling units across Abuja throughout the day, moving with authority, speaking with officials, making his presence unmistakable. There is just one problem. He is not a registered voter in Abuja. Under Nigerian electoral law, participation in an election is tied to where one is registered. Wike is registered in Rivers State, where he served 2 terms as governor. He could not vote in this election. He had no formal standing in it. Yet his involvement was impossible to ignore. Why would a local government election attract this level of federal attention? Why would a council contest generate more tension than some gubernatorial races? Because everyone understands that this election is not really about council chairs. It is about something bigger. It is about whether opposition forces, energized by movements associated with figures like Peter Obi, can withstand the full weight of federal power in the most symbolically important city in the country. That question is why Nigerians are watching. That question is why this election matters. And this is only the beginning. To understand what truly unfolded during the Abuja Area Council elections, you have to strip away the official language, ignore the press releases, and look carefully at behavior. Politics, especially Nigerian politics, reveals its truth not through what leaders say, but through what they do when they feel threatened. And what the ruling party did in the days and hours leading up to this election tells a story of fear. The All Progressives Congress controls the federal government. Its candidate occupies Aso Rock. It dominates the National Assembly. It oversees the security architecture of the country. In Abuja specifically, it enjoys an extraordinary advantage. The Federal Capital Territory is not governed by an elected governor but administered directly through a minister appointed by the president. That means the ruling party has direct influence over infrastructure, security agencies, local bureaucracy, and the overall atmosphere in which elections are conducted. In theory, this should translate into confidence. In reality, it produced panic. Because a party that truly believes it has the support of the people does not behave the way the APC behaved before and during this election. It does not restrict movement. It does not flood polling units with intimidation. It does not deploy federal authority into a local government contest. These are not the actions of a party cruising to victory. These are the actions of a party fighting to survive. Somewhere inside APC's internal meetings, someone looked at the numbers. Someone examined voter sentiment. Someone read the mood in Abuja's streets and estates and came to a frightening conclusion: this election could be lost. And when power feels that kind of fear, it reacts. Reports from across Abuja Municipal Area Council began to paint a disturbing picture as voting progressed. In wards like Kabusa, Takamshera, and surrounding communities, opposition agents representing the African Democratic Congress were reportedly subjected to direct threats. Not subtle warnings, not coded language, explicit threats of violence. Some were told they would be beaten if they stayed. Others were told they would be killed. Let us pause here. This was not happening in a remote rural village where state presence is weak. This was happening in the Federal Capital Territory, the administrative heart of Nigeria, the city that hosts the presidency, the National Assembly, the Supreme Court, and the headquarters of every major security agency in the country. If intimidation of this scale can happen here, in broad daylight, during a local government election, then what does that say about the state of Nigeria's democracy? Opposition agents are not activists. They are not protesters. They are legally accredited participants in the electoral process whose sole responsibility is to observe, record, and ensure that votes are counted honestly. Threatening them is not just a moral failure. It is an attack on the foundations of electoral legitimacy. And yet, those threats came anyway. Why? Because the results on the ground were not aligning with expectations. Across ward after ward, the ADC was outperforming projections. In some areas, APC was being humiliated. In others, it was scraping by on margins far too slim to be comfortable. And when combined with low turnout caused by movement restrictions, the picture became even more troubling for the ruling party. Low turnout elections are supposed to favor incumbents. They're supposed to suppress dissent. But in this case, even reduced participation was not enough to deliver the desired outcome. That is when desperation set in. And desperation often wears the face of overreach. The most visible symbol of that overreach was the physical presence of the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Nyesom Wike, moving from polling unit to polling unit across Abuja on election day. Cameras followed him. Voters noticed him. Electoral officials felt him. He was not subtle. He did not pretend to be merely observing from a distance. His presence carried authority, the kind that does not need to be spoken aloud to be understood. In Nigerian politics, power is communicated not just through words but through proximity. When a minister stands near you, watches you, speaks to you, you understand what is being implied. But here lies the fundamental issue. Under Nigerian electoral law, Wike had no formal role in this election. He is not registered to vote in Abuja. His name does not appear on the FCT voter register. His legal and civic connection to the election is non-existent. In the strictest sense, he was an outsider. And yet, he behaved like a stakeholder. Why would a federal minister insert himself so deeply into a local government election? Why would he personally inspect polling units? Why would his presence be so heavy, so deliberate, so visible? The answer lies in symbolism. Abuja is not just another city. It is the political mirror of Nigeria. What happens there sends a signal to the rest of the country. If opposition parties can organize, mobilize, and win convincingly in Abuja, under the direct gaze of federal power, then the myth of APC's invincibility begins to crack. And cracks are dangerous things in politics. Because once people see that power can be challenged, they begin to believe it can be defeated. This is why the Abuja Council elections generated more tension than many gubernatorial races. It is why social media exploded with interest. It is why Nigerians who have never voted in a council election suddenly care deeply about collation centers and result sheets. This election became a referendum, not on council chairman, but on whether opposition politics in Nigeria is still alive. The emotional energy around the election reflected this reality. Online spaces buzzed with updates from polling units. Pictures of signed result sheets circulated widely. Hashtags trended. Arguments erupted. Hope flickered in places where cynicism had long dominated. At the same time, anxiety grew. The malfunction of the INEC result viewing portal hung over everything like a dark cloud. Results were reportedly uploaded, yet not visible. Trust was eroding by the minute. In the absence of clear communication from INEC, fear filled the gap. Nigerians were no longer just watching an election. They were reliving a trauma. And trauma changes behavior. This is why calls from civic groups urging citizens to physically monitor collation centers resonated so strongly. People were no longer content to wait passively for announcements. They wanted to see. They wanted to verify. They wanted to protect the integrity of what they believed might be a rare moment of democratic truth. Because deep down, Nigerians understood something crucial. Moments like this do not come often. For years, local government elections have been treated as ceremonial exercises, predictable, stage-managed, and largely irrelevant. Results are usually known before voting begins. Winners are declared with little resistance. The public barely notices. But this time, the script broke. And when a script breaks, those who benefit from it panic. The APC's behavior before and during this election revealed that panic. The movement restriction, the intimidation reports, the ministerial presence, the silence around the portal glitch. All of it points to a party that understood, perhaps for the first time in Abuja, that it could actually lose. And that realization matters, because politics is not just about winning or losing elections. It is about controlling narratives. And the narrative that emerged from Abuja on Saturday was one the ruling party desperately wanted to prevent. That even under intense pressure, even with reduced turnout, even with the machinery of the state leaning heavily against them, ordinary Nigerians still chose the opposition. That is not just a result. That is a statement. And it sets the stage for what comes next. TS, even when they are not on the ballot. At the heart of every election is a simple question. Does the process reflect the will of the people, or does it reflect the will of power? That question is not academic. It is not theoretical. It is the difference between democracy and performance. And it is the question Nigerians found themselves asking again as events unfolded during the Abuja Area Council elections. To understand why this election struck such a deep nerve across the country, you must understand what Abuja represents. Abuja is not just a city, it is the political soul of Nigeria. It is neutral ground, at least in theory. It does not belong to any ethnic group, any state, or any traditional political structure. It was designed to be everyone's capital, a place where federal power is exercised, but not personalized. That is why what happens in Abuja carries weight far beyond its geographic size. When elections are manipulated in a state, people often shrug and say, "That governor did it." When things go wrong in a local government, the blame is localized. But when things go wrong in Abuja, there is nowhere to hide. The federal government is not an observer here. It is the administrator, the referee, and the player occupy the same space. And that is what makes this election so sensitive. Under Nigerian law, elections are meant to be conducted independently by the independent National Electoral Commission, free from interference by the executive arm of government. The separation is not ceremonial. It exists because history has taught us what happens when those lines blur. Abuse follows, trust collapses, legitimacy erodes. So when federal authority appears to lean heavily into a local government election, through movement restrictions, security pressure, visible ministerial involvement, and silence in the face of technical failures, it raises serious legal and ethical concerns. Let us be clear about this. A movement restriction on election day is not illegal by default. Governments have the authority to impose security measures where necessary. But legality is not the same as legitimacy. Context matters. Timing matters. Impact matters. When such a restriction disproportionately affects ordinary voters while leaving political elites untouched, it ceases to be a neutral security measure and begins to look like voter suppression. When it is imposed in a territory directly controlled by the ruling party during an election where that party is underperforming, suspicion is not paranoia. It is reason. Add to that the reports of intimidation against opposition agents, threats of physical harm, coercion to abandon polling units, and the ethical picture darkens further. Elections are not only about votes, they are about conditions. A vote cast under fear is not free. A process monitored under threat is not fair. And this is where Abuja's symbolism becomes critical. If federal power can be deployed so aggressively in the capital, where visibility is highest and scrutiny is strongest, then what message does that send about elections elsewhere? If the rules can bend here, they can break anywhere. This is why Nigerians reacted so intensely. This is why council elections suddenly became national news. Because people understood, instinctively, that this was not just about who would chair an area council. It was about whether Nigeria's democratic institutions could still hold under pressure. And hovering over all of this, unspoken but undeniable, is 2027. Every serious political actor in Nigeria is already thinking about the next general election. Coalitions are being tested. Voter behavior is being studied. Power blocks are being assessed. And Abuja, with its diverse population and symbolic weight, is a perfect testing ground. The performance of the opposition in this election did not happen in isolation. It is connected to a broader political awakening that began years ago and crystallized during the last general election. A movement that reshaped political conversations, mobilized young voters, and challenged entrenched assumptions about voter apathy. The performance of the opposition in this election did not happen in isolation. It is connected to a broader political awakening that began years ago and crystallized during the last general election. A movement that reshaped political conversations, mobilized young voters, and challenged entrenched assumptions about voter apathy. That movement is inseparable from one name, Peter Obi. Peter Obi was not on the ballot in this election. He did not campaign for council chairman. He did not issue statements about AMAC. And yet, his political shadow loomed large over the entire process. Why? Because politics is not only about candidates. It is about ideas. It is about alignment. It is about identity. The voters who turned out for ADC in Abuja are not traditional party loyalists in the old sense. Many of them are politically awakened citizens whose worldview was shaped by the obedient movement, people who now see voting as an act of resistance, not routine. People who no longer accept that outcomes are predetermined. People who believe that participation, even when imperfect, still matters. This is the legacy that Peter Obi represents, regardless of party logos. And that legacy is deeply unsettling to the political establishment. Because it cannot be controlled through patronage. It cannot be silenced through intimidation alone. It cannot be dismantled by restricting movement for a few hours. It lives in the minds of voters. That is why what happened in Abuja frightened those in power. Not because they lost a council seat, but because they saw proof that the opposition's base is still alive, still motivated, and still willing to defy fear. And that brings us back to the issue of legitimacy. Legitimacy does not come from declaring results. It comes from acceptance, from belief, from trust. When citizens believe an election reflects their will, they accept outcomes, even when their preferred candidate loses. But when trust collapses, even victory tastes hollow. This is the danger Nigeria now faces. If elections are perceived as manipulated, if institutions appear compromised, if silence replaces transparency, then democratic participation becomes performative. People disengage. Cynicism hardens. Extremes grow. But the Abuja election suggests something else as well. It suggests that despite everything, despite intimidation, despite restrictions, despite technological failures, Nigerians are not done yet. That there is still a hunger for agency. That there are still citizens willing to stand in line, sign result sheets, take pictures, and defend the process with their presence. That matters, because democracy does not die in one dramatic moment. It erodes quietly unless people resist. What happened in Abuja was resistance. Imperfect, messy, incomplete, but real. And that is why the outcome, whatever form it finally takes, will echo far beyond the boundaries of Abuja Municipal Area Council. Every election reaches a moment where the noise fades and only one thing matters: collation. It is at the collation stage that elections are either confirmed or compromised. Votes are no longer cast there. The people have already spoken. What happens next is purely administrative. At least, that is how it is supposed to be. Results are brought in, cross-checked, verified, and announced. Simple, transparent, mechanical. But in Nigeria, collation is rarely simple. It is at this stage that elections are most vulnerable. Vulnerable to delays. Vulnerable to pressure. Vulnerable to quiet alterations made far away from the eyes of voters. That is why what happened next in Abuja was so critical, and why citizens instinctively understood that the fight did not end when voting closed. As reports of ADC's strong performance spread, attention shifted immediately to the collation centers, particularly those in Area 10 and Garki. These locations became symbolic battlegrounds, not because violence was expected, but because legitimacy was at stake. Nigerians have learned, through painful experience, that elections are not stolen at polling units. They're stolen in silence during collation. This is why civic groups urge citizens to show up peacefully with physical copies of polling unit results. Not to protest, not to disrupt, but to watch, to verify, to remind officials that this time, people were paying attention. This was not mob action. It was democratic vigilance. And that distinction matters. In a functioning democracy, citizens do not disappear after voting. They remain engaged. They observe. They ask questions. They demand explanations when systems fail. This is not hostility to the state, it is participation in it. The malfunction of the independent National Electoral Commission result viewing portal cast a long shadow over the process. Technology that was meant to inspire trust instead deepened suspicion. Results that were said to be uploaded but not visible created an information vacuum, and in Nigeria, vacuums are filled quickly, with fear, rumors, and anger. INEC's greatest failure in moments like this is not technical. It is communicative. Silence in a tense electoral environment is not neutral. It erodes confidence. It allows doubt to metastasize. Even when there are genuine technical issues, transparency is the only antidote. And yet, Nigerians did not retreat. What we witnessed instead was something rare in the country's electoral history: collective insistence on accountability. Ordinary citizens discussing result sheets, comparing figures, asking intelligent questions, refusing to be gaslit by vague assurances. This is what scared the establishment. Not protests, not slogans, but awareness. Because awareness cannot be intimidated easily. The Abuja Area Council elections revealed something that power would rather keep hidden, that even under pressure, even with restrictions, Even with institutional disadvantages, opposition politics in Nigeria is not dead. It is evolving. It is decentralizing. It is becoming citizen-driven rather than elite-controlled. This is the deeper meaning of what happened. This election was not about ADC alone. It was not even about party logos. It was about a new political attitude, one shaped by years of disappointment, sharpened by recent betrayals, and inspired by the belief that votes should count. That belief did not emerge by accident. It is part of a broader political awakening associated with movements and figures that challenged old assumptions. Figures like Peter Obi, whose influence now extends far beyond any single election or ballot. You do not need to like Peter Obi to understand this reality. His significance lies not in personal ambition, but in what he catalyzed, a generation of Nigerians who now see politics not as entertainment, but as responsibility. People who no longer assume defeat before voting begins. That mindset is dangerous to any political system built on apathy. Which brings us to the most important question of all. What does this election mean for Nigeria? It means that democracy here is wounded, but not dead. It means institutions are under strain, but not completely broken. It means power can still be challenged, even in the capital. But it also means the road ahead is difficult, because moments like this can go two ways. They can become turning points, where institutions learn, reform, and rebuild trust. Or they can become cautionary tales, where hope is raised only to be crushed by manipulation and silence. The choice does not belong to politicians alone. It belongs to citizens. Democracy does not survive because constitutions say it should. It survives because people insist on it. Quietly, persistently, lawfully. By showing up. By asking questions. By refusing to forget. What happened in Abuja will be studied. By political parties. By analysts. By power brokers. And by ordinary Nigerians who now understand that even local elections matter. Especially local elections. Because they reveal the truth more clearly than grand national contests. They strip away spectacle and expose intent. They show how power behaves when it thinks nobody is watching. This time, people were watching. And that may be the most important result of all. This has been Brainspot Media, bringing you the truth with clarity, context, and courage. If you found value in this documentary, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, like this video, comment your thoughts, and share it widely. Stay informed, stay engaged, stay vigilant, because the future of Nigeria's democracy will not be decided in one election, but by what we do after it. Thank you for watching.